Have you ever felt invisible, overlooked, judged in an instant by someone who holds a tiny sliver of power over you? We've all been there. The curt reply, the dismissive wave, the cold stare that makes you feel like less than a person. But what happens when that casual disregard explodes into something more? When a moment of prejudice and aggression is directed at the one person you should never, ever cross. This is not a story about a simple customer service complaint. It's a story about power, identity, and the shocking moment a gate agent put his hands on a black woman, forcing her against the cold, hard metal of a security gate, completely unaware he was assaulting the CEO of the very airline he worked for. Stay with us as we unfold the entire unbelievable real-life drama. The air in Terminal 3 of Chicago O'Hare International Airport was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the low, anxious hum of delayed travel. It was a symphony of frustration, composed of rolling suitcases, crackling intercom announcements, and the crying of an overtired child. For Dr. Evelyn Reed, it was a familiar orchestra. She stood in the snaking boarding line for Ascend Air Flight 722 to Dallas, just another face in the weary crowd. To any casual observer, she was unremarkable. She wore simple, comfortable gray sweatpants, a well-worn Stevie Nicks tour t-shirt from 1981, and a pair of practical sneakers. Her hair, a cascade of intricate micro-braids, was pulled back into a simple ponytail. There was no flashy jewelry, no designer handbag. The only hint of her status was the worn leather-bound copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditation she held in her hand. This was her ritual. 4 times a year she flew incognito on one of her own planes. Not in first class, but here, in the trenches of Zone 4 boarding, where the true customer experience lived and died. It was on these anonymous journeys that she, the CEO of Ascend Air, took the real pulse of the company she had spent the last 3 years trying to rebuild from the inside out. At the head of the line, presiding over the gate with the weary authority of a feudal lord, was Robert Washington. Rob, as his badge read, was a man simmering in a stew of his own resentment. 15 years with the airline, and he was still here scanning boarding passes, policing carry-on sizes, and absorbing the silent, and sometimes not-so-silent contempt of thousands of passengers a day. He saw them not as people, but as obstacles, moving pieces of luggage that had to be crammed into a metal tube so he could get on with his miserable day. His mortgage was overdue, his teenage son was in trouble at school again, and the overtime pay had been shrinking. Every smiling face in the vacation-bound crowd felt like a personal insult. The flight was already delayed by 40 minutes due to a late inbound aircraft, and Rob's patience had worn tissue paper thin. He barked orders, his voice a gravelly monotone. "Wheels first in the sizer. Wheels first. Personal items under the seat in front of you, people. It's not rocket science." He spotted Evelyn before she even reached the podium. He saw the sweatpants, the old t-shirt, and his internal calculus, honed by years of petty prejudices, clicked into place. Here we go, he thought. Gonna be a problem. He'd seen 1,000 like her, trying to bring on oversized bags, arguing about seating assignments, demanding special treatment they hadn't paid for. His posture stiffened, a silent preparation for a battle he was already fighting in his head. Evelyn stepped forward, offering a small, polite smile. "Good afternoon," she said, holding out her phone with the digital boarding pass. Rob didn't return the greeting. His eyes darted from her face down to her 2 bags, a standard rollaboard carry-on and a leather satchel that served as her purse and briefcase. The satchel was, by any reasonable measure, a personal item. But for Rob, today, it was a target. "Only 1 carry-on and 1 personal item," he grunted, not even looking at her boarding pass. "That's right," Evelyn replied calmly. "This is my carry-on," she gestured to the roller bag. "And this is my personal item." Rob shook his head, a smirk of satisfaction playing on his lips. He pointed a thick finger at her satchel. "That's too big for a personal item. It's a second carry-on. You'll have to gate check one of them." Evelyn paused. She knew the company's baggage dimensions by heart. She had, after all, signed off on the policy herself. Her bag was compliant. She also knew that gate-checking now would mean a long wait at the baggage claim in Dallas, potentially making her late for a dinner she had arranged with her chief financial officer. "I can assure you it fits," she said, her tone still even. "I fly with it all the time. It fits perfectly under the seat." The word assure lit a fuse in Rob's mind. The sheer audacity. He saw it as a challenge to his authority, his little kingdom of Gate C-22. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know what fits and what doesn't. That doesn't fit." He gestured to the baggage sizer next to the counter. "Put it in the sizer." A few people behind Evelyn in line groaned. A younger gate agent, a woman named Maria, shot Rob a nervous glance. She knew the bag would likely fit, and this confrontation was unnecessary. It was one of Rob's power plays, and she hated when he did this. Evelyn, sensing the growing audience and wanting to de-escalate, said, "Okay, that's no problem." She walked over and slid the leather satchel into the metal cage. It was snug, but it fit, clearing all sides. It didn't need to be forced. She looked at Rob, expecting him to relent. Instead, she saw a flash of anger in his eyes. He had been proven wrong, and in his world, that was an intolerable offense, especially from someone like her. "See, I told you it wouldn't fit. You had to shove it in." He lied, his voice rising. "It's too tight. You're holding up the line. Take it out. We have to check it." This was the moment the situation turned. It was no longer about a bag. It was about a man who refused to be wrong. Evelyn's expression shifted. The polite, anonymous passenger was gone, replaced by a flicker of the CEO. Her voice lost its warmth, replaced by a cool, precise clarity. "I did not shove it in," she stated, looking him directly in the eye. "It slid in perfectly. Your own company policy, Section 4, subsection B, defines the dimensions, and this bag meets them. Furthermore, the final discretion for an item that fits in the sizer rests with the passenger. You are misinterpreting the rules." The specific mention of the policy section stunned Rob. It was like a chess player unexpectedly calling out a grandmaster's obscure opening move. It threw him completely off balance. Passengers didn't know policy sections. His frustration, fueled by prejudice and wounded pride, boiled over into pure rage. "You don't get to tell me the rules," he snarled, stepping out from behind the podium. His face was red. "You think you're special? You people always think you're special, coming in here with your attitudes." The "you people" hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Maria visibly flinched. Evelyn's face became an unreadable mask of calm, but her heart was pounding. She had faced down hostile corporate raiders and cutthroat competitors, but this raw, personal venom was something different. It was uglier. "You need to check the bag or you're not getting on this plane," Rob spat, jabbing a finger toward her. "Now give me the bag." "I am not going to do that," Evelyn said, her voice dangerously quiet. "What I am going to do is take your name and report this." That was it, the final straw. In Rob's mind, she had threatened him, his livelihood. All his simmering anger, his feeling of powerlessness in his own life erupted. He moved with a speed that shocked everyone. He grabbed Evelyn's arm. She instinctively pulled back, and in that moment, he lost all control. With a furious shove, he slammed her backward. Her body hit the hard, unforgiving metal frame of the jet bridge entrance with a sickening thud. The impact knocked the wind out of her. Her head snapped back, and her copy of Meditations flew from her hand, skittering across the grimy floor. For a split second, there was absolute silence. The line of passengers froze. Maria's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Evelyn Reed, the CEO of Ascend Air, leaned against the metal frame, gasping for air, the shock and pain radiating through her back. She stared at Robert Washington, not with anger, but with a sudden, chilling clarity. The problem wasn't just a delayed flight or a misinterpreted rule. The problem was right in front of her, and she, in the most brutal way imaginable, now had first-hand data on just how deep the rot went. The anonymous journey was over. The real work was about to begin. Pain, sharp and immediate, shot up Evelyn's spine. Her shoulder ached where it had taken the brunt of the impact against the cold, unyielding steel. For a heartbeat, all she could hear was the blood rushing in her ears. The hum of the terminal, the shuffling feet, the distant announcements, it all faded into a dull roar. In its place was the stark, ugly reality of what had just happened. A man, her employee, had put his hands on her. He had assaulted her. But as the initial shock subsided, something else, something forged in years of high-stakes boardrooms and crisis management, took over. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Anger was a tool to be used later with precision. Right now, she needed control. She pushed herself off the frame, her movements deliberate and steady, betraying none of the trembling she felt inside. She met Robert Washington's wild, panicked eyes. He seemed to realize, a second too late, the enormity of what he had done. His face, once flushed with rage, had gone pale. Evelyn ignored the hand he tentatively offered. She bent down slowly, picked up her book, and tucked it back into her satchel. She brushed a piece of dust from her sleeve. She was not just a victim, she was a CEO collecting evidence. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was devoid of any emotion. It was as cold and sharp as surgical steel. "Robert Washington," she said, reading his name tag aloud as if engraving it in her memory. "Per Federal Aviation Administration regulations, specifically 14 CFR Part 121, interfering with, assaulting, or intimidating a crew member or gate agent is a federal offense. However, the same regulations implicitly demand a professional standard of conduct from airline personnel. Furthermore, Ascend Air's own code of conduct, which you agreed to upon your employment, explicitly forbids any physical contact with a passenger, except in documented cases of self-defense or imminent security threat." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the now silent terminal area. Rob stared at her, dumbfounded. It was as if the woman he'd just shoved had transformed. The casual traveler was gone, replaced by a lawyer or a federal agent, he couldn't tell. He was drowning, and she was quoting the statutes that would be his undoing. Maria, the younger agent, found her voice first. "Rob, what did you do?" she whispered, horrified. She rushed to Evelyn's side. "Ma'am, are you okay? Should I call for a medic?" "I am physically unharmed, thank you," Evelyn said, giving the young woman a brief, appreciative nod. "But I do require your supervisor, immediately." Rob, jolted into action by the word supervisor, stammered, "Look, you were being difficult, you wouldn't listen." Evelyn cut him off with a look so cold it could freeze fire. "Do not speak to me again," she commanded. "Get your supervisor." Rob, now trembling, fumbled for the walkie-talkie on his belt. His swagger had completely evaporated, replaced by the clammy fear of a man who saw his life unraveling. His call was a panicked squawk. "Thompson, need you at C-22. Situation with a passenger." While they waited, Evelyn took out her phone. She didn't make a call. She opened a notes app and began typing. Date, July 17th, 2025. Time, 1:28 p.m. CT. Location, ORD, Gate C-22. Incident, physical assault by gate agent Robert Washington, employee number 77429. Witness, gate agent Maria, employee number 91034. She was building a case file. Within 3 minutes, a man in a slightly better-fitting but equally rumpled suit bustled toward the gate. This was Mr. Thompson, the duty manager. Thompson was a man whose entire career was built on making problems disappear, usually by smoothing them over with practiced apologies and low-value travel vouchers. He saw his job not as solving issues, but as containing them long enough for the plane to leave the gate. He arrived, surveyed the scene, the pale face of his agent, the shocked faces of the passengers, and Evelyn, standing with an unnerving stillness, and immediately launched into his script. "All right, what seems to be the trouble here?" he asked, his voice projecting an air of bored authority. He directed the question not at Evelyn, but at Rob. She was refusing to check her bag, holding up the line, being disruptive," Rob mumbled, desperately trying to frame the narrative. Thompson nodded. already forming his conclusion. It was always the passenger's fault. He turned to Evelyn, his expression a mask of strained patience. "Ma'am, I understand there was a disagreement. My agent was just trying to enforce our baggage policy to ensure an on-time departure for everyone." Evelyn stared at him. He hadn't asked if she was okay. He hadn't asked for her side of the story. He was already in damage control mode, and the damage he was concerned with was to the flight schedule, not to her. "A disagreement?" Evelyn repeated, her voice dangerously soft. "Your agent put his hands on me and shoved me against a metal wall. That's not a disagreement. That's assault." Thompson's practiced smile faltered for a second. Assault was a bad word. It meant paperwork. It meant reports. He shot a furious glare at Rob. "Now let's not be hyperbolic," he said, turning back to Evelyn. "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding in a stressful situation. On behalf of Ascendair, I do apologize if you felt you were mistreated." He pulled a small booklet from his jacket pocket. "I'm prepared to offer you a $75 voucher for your trouble, for a future flight with us. Now, if we can just get you scanned and onto the plane, we can get everyone on their way." He offered the voucher booklet to her as if it were a peace treaty that could erase the last 10 minutes. The casual, dismissive nature of the gesture was, in its own way, more insulting than the shove. It told her everything she needed to know about the systemic rot. This wasn't about one bad apple in Rob. This was the culture. Problems weren't solved. They were bought off, cheaply. Thompson saw her not as a person who had been violated, but as a liability to be managed for $75. This was the moment of decision. She could feel the stares of the other passengers. She could hear the flight crew making final boarding calls. She could end this right now. She could say her name, flash her credentials, and watch these two men crumble into dust. The temptation was immense. A wave of righteous fury washed over her, and she wanted more than anything to see the look on their faces when they realized who she was. But then, another thought, colder and more strategic, pushed the anger aside. If she revealed herself now, the problem would be contained to this gate, to these two men. They would be fired, an apology would be issued, and the system, the broken, indifferent system that allowed a Thompson to flourish and a Rob to fester, would remain untouched. The wound would be cauterized, but the disease would remain. No. To truly fix this, she had to see it through. She had to experience the full, unvarnished process. She had to be Jane Doe passenger and see just how deep the rabbit hole of her company's indifference went. She looked at the voucher in Thompson's hand and then met his eyes. "No," she said simply. Thompson blinked. "No. No, I will not be accepting your voucher, and I will not be getting on this flight," Evelyn stated. "What I will be doing is filing a formal, official complaint against both of you, so I will need your full name and employee number as well, Mr. Thompson." Thompson's jaw tightened. This was not in the script. The passenger was refusing to be placated. "Ma'am, that's really not necessary. Your full name and your employee number. Now," Evelyn commanded, her phone still in her hand, the Notes app open and waiting. Defeated, Thompson recited his name and number, his voice dripping with resentment. Evelyn typed them in meticulously. "Thank you," she said, the words carrying an immense weight. "You may now continue boarding your flight. I will handle my complaint through the official channels." She turned, picked up her roll-aboard bag, and walked away from Gate C-22, leaving behind two stunned employees, a line of bewildered passengers, and the beginning of a corporate earthquake she was now determined to create. She was no longer just flying incognito. She was on a mission. Evelyn Reed didn't leave the airport. Instead, she found a quiet corner in a less crowded terminal, bought a bottle of water, and sat down. The adrenaline from the confrontation began to fade, replaced by a cold, simmering rage and the dull, persistent ache in her back. She was a woman who commanded a multi-billion-dollar corporation, who could move markets with a single press release. Yet she had never felt so powerless. It was a humbling, infuriating, and profoundly clarifying experience. Her first step was to test the primary channel for customer grievances, The Ascend Air customer service hotline. Using her personal cell phone, she navigated the automated phone tree, a digital labyrinth she herself had approved budget for, but had never personally experienced. For reservations, press 1. For flight status, press 2. For baggage inquiries, press 3. For all other inquiries, please stay on the line. The cheerful, disembodied voice chirped. She stayed on the line. She was greeted by 30 seconds of upbeat, branded hold music, a jaunty pop tune that felt grotesquely inappropriate for her current state of mind. She had sat in meetings where marketing teams presented this very music as a key element of their uplifting customer soundscape. Hearing it now, it was nails on a chalkboard. Finally, a click. "Thank you for calling Ascend Air. My name is Brenda. How can I help you today?" The voice was tired, distant, with the distinct echo of a large overseas call center. Evelyn took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady and adopting the persona of a justifiably upset but not hysterical passenger. "Hello, Brenda. I need to file a formal complaint regarding a serious incident at the gate." "I can certainly help you with that, ma'am," Brenda said, her tone suggesting she was already clicking through a pre-written script. "Do you have your flight confirmation number?" Evelyn provided it. She heard the clacking of a keyboard. "Okay. I see you were a passenger on flight 722 from Chicago to Dallas, but your ticket wasn't scanned for boarding. Is this about a refund for the flight?" "No, Brenda, it's not about a refund," Evelyn said, pinching the bridge of her nose. "I was assaulted by a gate agent. He physically shoved me." There was a pause. The clacking stopped. "Assaulted?" Brenda repeated, the words sounding foreign and outside the scope of her script. "Ma'am, our gate agents are highly trained professionals." "Your highly trained professionals slammed me against a wall," Evelyn interjected, her patience fraying. "I want to file a formal documented complaint against him and his supervisor who tried to cover it up." "Okay. I am very sorry to hear that," Brenda said, the practiced sympathy sounding hollow. "For an issue of this nature, you will need to submit your complaint in writing through our website. We can't take down the details of a physical incident over the phone for liability reasons." Evelyn felt a flash of fury. It was a perfect corporate catch-22. The system was designed to deflect, not to resolve. It created barriers, hoping the frustrated customer would simply give up. "Can you at least give me an incident number for this call?" "We don't generate incident numbers until a written complaint is filed, ma'am." "So, just to be clear," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with ice, "I am telling you I was physically assaulted by an employee, and the official response from Ascend Air is fill out a form on our website." "That is the procedure, ma'am," Brenda replied, her voice unwavering. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No, Brenda," Evelyn said, her jaw tight. "You've been incredibly unhelpful." She ended the call. For a moment, she just sat there staring at her phone. This was her company, her procedures, her system, and it was failing at the most fundamental level. It was designed to protect the corporation, not the customer. Undeterred, she opened her laptop, connected to the airport's spotty Wi-Fi, and navigated to the Ascend Air website. She found the Contact Us page, a sterile form with a 1000 character limit for the complaint description. It was insultingly small, a design choice meant to discourage detailed accounts. Meticulously, Evelyn laid out the facts, using the precise, emotionless language of a legal brief. She detailed Rob's aggression, his words, the physical assault. She detailed Thompson's dismissive attitude, his attempt to buy her silence with a voucher, and his failure to take her statement. She included their names and employee numbers. She concluded by stating she was seeking a formal investigation and a response from the airline's corporate office. She hit submit. An automated email landed in her personal inbox moments later. "Thank you for contacting Ascend Air. We have received your message and will respond within 5-7 business days. We value your business. 5 to 7 business days. For a report of physical assault. It was beyond unacceptable." Meanwhile, back at Gate C-22, Thompson was doing his own version of paperwork. He logged into the internal employee incident management system. In his report, he painted Evelyn as the aggressor. passenger, last name from booking Reed, became verbally abusive and non-compliant with crew instructions regarding carry-on baggage, disrupted boarding process, was instructed to step aside and refused. In the process of refusing to comply, passenger stumbled backward near the jet bridge, claimed she was pushed, offered customer service voucher to de-escalate, which passenger refused before leaving the gate area. No further action required. He called Rob over and had him sign off on the report. "That's it," Thompson said with a smug finality. "She was just another scammer looking for a free flight. Your story, my story. It's over. Don't worry about it." Rob, still shaken but desperate to believe his boss, nodded. "Yeah, okay, thanks, Thompson." They thought it was done. They had no idea that their sanitized, self-serving report was about to be cross-referenced with a complaint that was slowly, but surely making its way up the food chain, flagged by certain keywords: assault, legal, federal complaint, that a low-level algorithm was designed to catch. 2 days passed. Evelyn flew back to Dallas on a different airline. She worked from her home office, handling the day-to-day chaos of running a major airline while waiting. On the 3rd day, a human response to her complaint finally arrived. It was from a Kevin G., customer relations specialist. "Dear Miss Reed, thank you for sharing your feedback about your recent travel experience at Chicago O'Hare. We at Ascend Air pride ourselves on providing a safe and comfortable journey, and we regret that your experience did not meet these standards. We have reviewed the situation and understand that there was a disagreement with our ground staff regarding our baggage policies. These policies are in place for the safety and comfort of all our passengers. While we found that our staff acted in accordance with established procedures, we understand that misunderstandings can happen in a busy airport environment. As a gesture of goodwill, we would like to offer you a $150 travel voucher for a future flight. We hope you will give us another opportunity to provide you with the excellent service you expect and deserve. Sincerely, Kevin G." Evelyn read the email once, then a second time. It was a masterpiece of corporate non-apology. It invalidated her experience, sided with the employees based on Thompson's falsified report, and attempted to placate her with a slightly larger yet equally insulting voucher. They hadn't investigated. They had cross-referenced a file number, glanced at a manager's report, and clicked send on a template. This was the final piece of evidence she needed. The system wasn't just broken. It was actively working against the truth. It was designed to protect itself at all costs. She closed her laptop. The time for data collection was over. The time for action had come. She picked up her work phone, the one connected directly to the highest levels of the company, and dialed her executive assistant. "Claire," she said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of command. "Clear my schedule for the rest of the week, and I want you to call an emergency meeting of the entire executive leadership team, VPs and above, system-wide. Get them to Dallas tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp." "Of course, Dr. Reed," Claire replied. "What should I list as the agenda?" Evelyn stared out her window, a storm gathering in her eyes. "The agenda," she said, "is passenger Jane Doe." The next morning, the main boardroom at Ascend Air's Dallas headquarters buzzed with nervous energy. An emergency all-hands executive meeting called with less than 24 hours' notice was a rare and ominous event. It usually meant one of two things: a hostile takeover bid or a catastrophic safety failure. Vice presidents had flown in overnight from Atlanta, Denver, and Los Angeles. They milled around the massive mahogany table, sipping coffee, trading hushed theories. Charles Sterling, the vice president of North American operations, stood near the head of the table, projecting an air of confidence he didn't feel. He was a creature of the corporation, slick, ambitious, and politically savvy. His domain included all domestic airports, which meant that ultimately every gate agent and duty manager, including those at O'Hare, reported up his chain of command. He'd done a cursory check the night before. No crashes, no major security breaches. He assumed this was about the dismal quarterly performance numbers and had prepared his usual excuses about fuel costs and market volatility. At precisely 9 a.m., The boardroom doors swung open. Dr. Evelyn Reed entered. The chatter immediately ceased. She didn't walk to her usual seat at the head of the table. Instead, she moved to the lectern at the front of the room, typically reserved for presentations. She wore a sharp, dark gray power suit, a stark contrast to the anonymous traveler she had been just days before. Her face was impassive, but her eyes held an intensity that made several of the VPs shift uncomfortably in their leather chairs. "Good morning," she began, her voice filling the silent room. "Thank you for assembling on such short notice. We are here today to discuss a fundamental breakdown in our operations. A failure not of logistics, not of finance, but of our most basic promise to our customers." She clicked a remote. The massive screen behind her, usually displaying sales projections, flickered to life. It showed the Ascend Air mission statement written in soft, friendly letters. To connect people, delivering a safe, reliable, and welcoming travel experience with a spirit of care. A spirit of care, Evelyn repeated softly, letting the words hang in the air. "I want you all to keep those words in mind." She clicked the remote again. The mission statement was replaced by a grainy black and white image. It was a still frame from a security camera, time-stamped 3 days prior. It showed the boarding area of Gate C-22 at O'Hare. It showed a gate agent, his face contorted in anger, with his hands on a female passenger, shoving her backward against the jet bridge entrance. A low murmur went through the room. Charles Sterling squinted, recognizing the location. A knot of dread began to form in his stomach. "Let's call this woman Passenger Jane Doe," Evelyn said, her voice still unnervingly calm. "Jane was flying with us from Chicago to Dallas. She was a fully paid passenger. She had 2 bags, both compliant with our policies. She was met at the gate by an employee who, for reasons we will explore, decided she was a problem before she even spoke. She began to lay out the case piece by painful piece. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't gesture wildly. She simply presented the evidence as if she were a prosecutor addressing a jury. She spoke of the argument over the bag, the refusal of the agent to accept that he was wrong, and the final, violent shove. Charles Sterling felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. This was on his turf. O'Hare was his responsibility. "Now, an incident like this is bad enough," Evelyn continued. "It represents a catastrophic failure of training and professional conduct. But what happened next is, in many ways, far worse." Click. The screen changed. It now showed a screenshot of a call log from her personal phone. "Passenger Doe, shaken and in pain, attempted to report this assault through our primary customer service channel. She was put on hold, told we couldn't handle such complaints over the phone for liability reasons, and was directed to an online form with a 1000 character limit." A few of the executives winced. They knew how bad the customer service line was. They just never had to use it themselves. Click. The screen now showed the generic automated email response. "We will respond in 5-7 business days." 5 to 7 days, Evelyn said, her voice dropping. "For a woman who was physically assaulted by our staff. Is that our spirit of care?" No one dared to answer. The air in the room was growing thick with shame and fear. Charles Sterling felt a growing sense of panic. He vaguely remembered a low-level incident report from O'Hare a few days ago about a disruptive passenger. He had skimmed it and dismissed it. Oh God. "But it gets worse," Evelyn said. She looked directly at Charles Sterling, and for the first time he saw the ice in her eyes. "Because while Passenger Doe was being stonewalled, our employees were busy creating their own narrative." Click. A new document filled the screen. It was Thompson's internal report. Evelyn began to read it aloud, her voice dripping with contempt. "Passenger became verbally abusive, non-compliant, disrupted boarding, stumbled backward." This report was filed by the duty manager, a Mr. Thompson, and co-signed by the gate agent, a Mr. Robert Washington. It is a work of fiction designed for one purpose: to protect negligent employees from the consequences of their actions. Charles Sterling's blood ran cold. He knew those names. He felt a wave of nausea. He knew what was coming. "Finally," Evelyn said. "After 3 days, Passenger Doe received a personal response from our customer relations department." Click. Kevin G.'s email appeared on screen. The offer of a $150 voucher looking pathetic and insulting on the giant display. "The conclusion of our internal review," Evelyn announced to the stunned room, "was that our staff acted in accordance with established procedures, and the whole thing was a misunderstanding. We invalidated her story. We took the side of the employee who assaulted her, and we tried to buy her silence for $150. She let the silence stretch out, forcing them all to sit with the totality of the failure. The systemic, top-to-bottom, soul-crushing failure. She finally turned off the screen and stood before them in the quiet room. "I called this meeting because I wanted every single one of you to see, in detail, how our systems, our culture, and our people failed this passenger. I wanted you to feel the infuriating, humiliating journey she was forced to take." She paused, taking a slow breath. "And I know all of this," she said, her voice now barely above a whisper, but carrying more power than any shout, "because Passenger Jane Doe was me." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence filled with the sound of careers ending, of paradigm shifting, of a truth so shocking it was almost impossible to process. Charles Sterling looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His face was ashen, his mouth slightly agape. The VP of Human Resources stared at the floor. The Chief Marketing Officer, who had championed the Spirit of Care slogan, looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Evelyn Reed stood before them, not just as their CEO, but as the living embodiment of their greatest failure. The anonymous woman in sweatpants had returned to the boardroom, and with her, she had brought a storm that would tear the company down to its foundations, and if she had her way, build it back stronger. The day of reckoning had arrived. The revelation detonated in the boardroom like a silent bomb, the shockwave rolling across the faces of the assembled executives. Charles Sterling, the VP of North American Operations, looked physically ill. The falsified report from his subordinate, the dismissive actions of his team. It had all been directed at the one person in the world who could hold him fully and immediately accountable. Evelyn let the weight of her declaration settle for a full minute. She watched them squirm, watched the dawning horror in their eyes. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about ensuring they understood, in their bones, the gravity of the crisis. "Charles," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. He flinched as if he'd been tasered. "You are suspended, effective immediately. I want your company phone, laptop, and badge on this table before you leave the room. A third-party independent firm will be conducting a full investigation into the operational culture of your division, starting with the O'Hare station. You are not to have any contact with any Ascend Air employee until that investigation is complete." Sterling, pale and trembling, could only nod. His career, once a soaring trajectory, had just crashed and burned. He stumbled forward, placed his items on the gleaming mahogany table with a clatter, and walked out of the room without another word, a man stripped of his power in an instant. Evelyn's gaze swept across the remaining faces. "Let me be clear. This is not about two employees. This is about us. It is about a culture of indifference that we have allowed to grow in the dark. A culture where a stressed employee feels empowered to assault a passenger, and a manager feels his duty is to cover it up rather than to serve the customer. A culture where our response system is an insult, not a solution." She walked to the head of the table now, finally taking her seat. The dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. She was no longer just the CEO. She was a leader with a powerful, unassailable mandate for radical change. "So here is what is going to happen," she announced. "First, the Human Resources and Legal Departments will immediately place Robert Washington and Mr. Thompson on unpaid administrative leave pending the outcome of the external investigation. I suspect their careers with this airline are over." She turned to the head of HR. "Second, I want the entire customer relations department frozen. No more templated emails. No more 5-7 business days. An external consultant will be brought in to tear that system down to the studs and rebuild it with a singular focus: resolution. Every single complaint will be handled by an empowered agent in a domestic call center with the authority to actually fix problems. Next, she looked at the VP of Training and Development. Third, and most importantly, we are launching a new, mandatory company-wide initiative. We're calling it the Passenger Zero Program. It's based on the idea that we will now treat every single passenger as if they are our most important shareholder, our most vital asset, the passenger zero on whom our entire existence depends. The program, she explained, would be a sweeping overhaul. The pathetic 30-minute online de-escalation module would be replaced by a multi-day immersive training course for all 20,000 frontline employees, designed by leading experts in conflict resolution and implicit bias. Every employee, from the ramp agents to the pilots, would be required to attend. And I, she added, will be attending the first session of every single class. I will stand in front of our new hires and our veterans, and I will tell them the story of Jane Doe. I will make sure they understand that the person they are checking in, the person whose bag they are questioning, the person they are serving a drink to, is a human being who deserves dignity. And that person might just be their CEO in a Stevie Nicks t-shirt. In the days that followed, the company was thrown into a controlled chaos. The investigation into the O'Hare station uncovered a pattern of misconduct under Thompson's management, with multiple complaints that had been buried and ignored. Rob Washington was fired for gross misconduct and assault. Thompson was also terminated, not just for the cover-up, but for fostering a toxic work environment. But Evelyn's plan went beyond punishment. She remembered the other gate agent, the young woman who had reacted with horror. She had her assistant find her. 2 weeks later, Maria was flown to Dallas. She was nervous, expecting to be reprimanded for witnessing the event. Instead, she found herself sitting opposite the CEO. "Maria," Evelyn began, "I saw your face that day. You knew what was happening was wrong. You were the only person in a position of authority who showed a shred of human decency." Evelyn offered Maria a position on the task force designing the new Passenger Zero training program. She wanted her real-world, on-the-ground perspective. She wanted an employee who still had a conscience to help shape the company's future. A tearful, stunned Maria accepted. Months passed. The changes were painful, expensive, and met with resistance from old guard managers who preferred the old way of doing things. But Evelyn was relentless. She sat in on the new training sessions, sharing her story with a raw honesty that captivated the employees. She showed them the security footage. She played the recordings of her calls to the indifferent service center. She made the failure real to them. She ended every session the same way. "Look at the person next to you," she'd say. "Look at your customers. See them. Don't just process them. The moment we lose our humanity is the moment we lose our business. This is our spirit of care. We will earn it back one passenger at a time." The culture of Ascend Air didn't change overnight. It was the slow, difficult work of turning a massive ship. But it was turning. Customer satisfaction scores began to tick upward. Employees, empowered by the new training and feeling valued by a CEO who had literally walked in their customers' shoes, started taking more initiative. The story of what happened at Gate C-22 became a legend within the company, a cautionary tale and a catalyst. Evelyn Reed had taken a moment of personal humiliation and violence and transformed it into the single most important event in her company's modern history. She proved that true leadership wasn't about the view from the corner office, but about the willingness to walk through the terminal, to stand in line, and to see the company not as it appeared on a spreadsheet, but as it was truly experienced by the people it claimed to serve. 8 months later, the seasons had turned. The raw, gaping wound Evelyn Reed had exposed at the heart of Ascend Air was beginning to heal into a formidable scar, a permanent reminder of the past and a symbol of newfound strength. The changes she had implemented were no longer just theoretical memos from corporate. They were living, breathing realities in terminals across the country. The Passenger Zero program was in full swing. Its headquarters was not a stuffy boardroom, but a repurposed hangar at the edge of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, transformed into a state-of-the-art training academy. Inside, the sterile smell of aircraft fuel had been replaced by the scent of fresh paint and coffee. On one wall, the Ascend Air mission statement was painted in enormous letters, "A spirit of care." On this particular Tuesday, a class of 30 employees, a mix of fresh-faced new hires and grizzled veterans, was deep into a role-playing exercise. Maria, the former gate agent from O'Hare, stood at the front, no longer a timid observer but a confident instructor. Her voice was firm, empathetic. "Okay, Frank," she said to a veteran gate agent with 20 years on the job. "The passenger in front of you has missed her connection because of our maintenance delay. She's going to miss her daughter's wedding. She's yelling. What's the first thing you do?" Frank, a man who a year ago would have yelled right back, took a deep breath. "I don't talk. I listen," he said, reciting the new mantra. "I let her say everything she needs to say. I validate her anger. I say the words, 'This is our fault and I am incredibly sorry.' And you don't offer her a voucher," Maria prompted with a knowing smile. "God, no," Frank chuckled, shaking his head. "I look for a solution. I see we have a code share partner with a flight leaving in an hour. It's more expensive, but I have the authority now. I book it, no charge. I give her a meal voucher for her wait. I walk her to the gate myself to make sure she gets on that plane." The scenario was based on a real incident from the week before, one that had been successfully de-escalated, and turned a furious passenger into a lifelong loyal customer who wrote a glowing letter to the company. As the session continued, the side door opened and Dr. Evelyn Reed stepped inside. A hush fell over the room. She was a regular presence here, but her authority was still palpable. She wore simple black trousers and a blue blouse. No power suit needed. She gestured for them to continue, taking a seat in the back. She listened as Maria led them through another scenario, this one involving a passenger whose anxiety presented as aggression. She watched as they discussed the tells, the language to use, the importance of seeing the human being behind the behavior. This was the harvest from the seeds of that ugly day. It was slow, painstaking work, but it was real. After the session, Evelyn spoke to the class. "I know some of you thought this was just the latest corporate fad," she said, her eyes scanning their faces. "I know some of you thought it was a punishment. It's not. It's an investment in you. Because you are not just the front line. You are the airline. That moment when a passenger meets you at the ticket counter or the gate, that is our entire brand. In that single interaction, we are either a caring, competent airline, or we are a faceless machine that doesn't give a damn. There is no in-between." She left them with that thought, walking out of the hangar and into the bright Texas sun, feeling a fragile sense of optimism. The ripple effects of that day at O'Hare had spread far beyond the walls of Ascend Air. For Robert Washington, life had become a series of quiet humiliations. He'd been fired for cause, his union unable to protect him from the undeniable evidence of assault against a passenger, a fact that became even more damning when the passenger's identity became the stuff of industry legend. He now worked for a third-party janitorial contractor, cleaning the food courts at Midway Airport, Chicago's other, less glamorous aviation hub. One evening during his shift, he stood by a window overlooking the airfield. An Ascend airplane, its tail painted with the familiar logo, pushed back from its gate. He watched the ground crew, the gate agents moving with a fluid professionalism. He saw an agent laugh with a passenger, helping them adjust their luggage. There was an ease to the interaction, a lack of the friction and hostility that had been his constant companion. He felt a bitter pang of resentment, followed by a hollow ache of regret. In his mind, he still told himself the woman had been the problem, that she had provoked him. But in the quiet, lonely hours of the night, when there was no one to blame, he remembered the thud of her body against the metal, the look of shock on her face, and the cold, sinking feeling that he had crossed a line from which there was no return. He had traded his small kingdom of power for a mop and a bucket, a ghost haunting the edges of the world he had lost. Mr. Thompson fared little better. As a manager, his failure was seen as even more profound. The story of his falsified report and his attempt to buy off the CEO with a $75 voucher was so egregious it had become a running joke in airline management circles. He tried to get a similar position at a rival carrier, but in his final interview, the VP looked at his resume and said, "You were at Ascend during the Passenger Zero incident, weren't you? At O'Hare?" The question was casual, but the implication was clear. He was radioactive. His name was synonymous with the old, broken way of doing things. He had built a career on covering up problems, and now he had become a problem that no one else wanted to inherit. 9 months to the day after the incident, Evelyn Reed booked a flight. Chicago O'Hare to Dallas Fort Worth. Coach, aisle seat. She dressed in jeans, a simple gray sweatshirt and sneakers, her hair once again pulled back in a simple ponytail. It was not an inspection, not truly. It was a pilgrimage, a need to close the circle. She felt a strange sense of déjà vu as she walked toward the Ascend Air Gates in Terminal 3. It was busy, chaotic, the familiar symphony of travel playing its tune. She found her gate, C-22, the same one. Her heart beat a little faster. The boarding process began and she joined the line for Zone 4. Ahead of her, a young couple with a baby were having trouble with their boarding passes. The scanner wouldn't accept them. The father was growing agitated, his voice rising in frustration. "It said we were checked in. I have the email. We're going to miss our flight." The gate agent, a young woman Evelyn didn't recognize, didn't recoil. She didn't get defensive. She made eye contact and smiled calmly. "Sir, please don't worry. I can see you're stressed, and I promise you, we are not going to let this plane leave without you and your family," she said, her voice reassuring. The man's shoulders sagged with relief at her words. The agent typed furiously into her computer. "Okay, I see the problem. It's a silly computer glitch. I can fix it right here," she explained, never making the passenger feel foolish. "Just give me 1 minute." While she worked, she looked at the baby. Wow, he's a champion traveler, so calm. The mother smiled, the tension completely broken. Within 2 minutes, the tickets were reissued and the family was boarding, thanking the agent profusely. Evelyn stepped forward. The agent took her phone, scanned the pass, and looked up at her with a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Reed. Hope you have a wonderful flight with us today." It was a simple, professional, human interaction. It was unremarkable, and in its unremarkableness, it was everything. It was the proof. Evelyn boarded the plane, found her seat, and stowed her small bag. As the aircraft pushed back from gate C-22 and began its slow taxi toward the runway, she looked out the small window at the sprawling concrete labyrinth of O'Hare. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or anger anymore. It was a tear of relief, of gratitude. The journey had been brutal, the cost immense, but looking at the families, the business travelers, the vacationers settling in around her, she knew it had been worth it. The airline wasn't perfect, it never would be, but today at least, it had a spirit of care, and for now, that was enough. In the end, this became more than just a story of a mistaken identity. It became a powerful lesson in corporate accountability and the incredible impact of empathetic leadership. A single ugly moment of prejudice at a gate in Chicago didn't just expose a few bad employees. It ripped the polite mask off an entire corporate culture, revealing the indifference beneath. But more importantly, it showed how a true leader, when faced with the failings of their own creation, can choose not revenge, but revolution. Dr. Evelyn Reed didn't just fire the people who wronged her. She rebuilt the entire system to ensure no passenger would ever feel as invisible as she did that day. She turned a personal trauma into a company-wide transformation, reminding us that real power isn't about the title you hold, but about your willingness to understand the experiences of those you lead. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And for more incredible true-life dramas, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What's the worst customer service experience you've ever had? Let's talk about it. Thank you for watching.